you going to win over enough voters to make the difference and get past that line that Democrats have so struggled with to actually win in Mississippi?
Yeah, and it's interesting, you know, a first-time political candidate. And so what we know is what everyone says, and that is people are hurting. And this is the poorest state in America, and our district is like 400 out of 435 in terms of wealth. So we know that in this administration, where they promised you the sun and the stars and they didn't deliver, that there's some letdown. And we see it across the first district. So we're doing this. We're saying, one, we have to look at gas prices caused by this silly war. We have to look at grocery prices, housing prices, health care, all the things. But we also are aware that you have to be a credible messenger. And so we're out there saying, look, you know, talk is cheap. Every candidate in both parties, actually, is talking about affordability. But I've been out there doing it. You know, you said, you know, I took down debtors' prisons. There was a judge who took a young woman's daughter, who's 4-month-old, said if you aren't responsible enough to pay fines in court, you aren't responsible enough to raise a child. We got that judge fired. I got that court shut down. I've taken on the practice of, you know, now we have aggressive panhandling laws in Mississippi that says if you're so poor you have to ask for money to eat, you have to buy a $25 a day permit in order to be permitted to do that in the most religious state in America.
But Republicans are anti-regulation.
In so many areas, right? I mean, this is part of the conversation we have, at least about normalcy, right? Like, where's the Republican Party of little c conservatism? And so it's a combination of, you know, the message of affordability, and we're hurting and we're here to help you, but it's also, and I have done this work, and I am not part of a rigged system. I will not take corporate PAC money. I do not believe in trading individual stocks. I will not become a lobbyist. And, you know, Trent Kelly, who's the incumbent, half of his money, more than $3 million, comes from corporate PACs and special interests. And I tell folks that guy's gone to Washington, and I will not do it. And that's really resonating, Elise. I think people want to know that you'll fight whoever needs fighting.
So it sounds like you have some purchase, so to speak, on the affordability piece of all of this, that people really are frustrated with rising gas prices, rising housing prices, the fact that Medicaid expansion has not come to Mississippi. What about on social issues? Because I would imagine that might be the bigger uphill climb for you. You are openly in favor of the right to an abortion, for example. Mississippi, as you point out, both of you pointed out, is a very religious state, a very socially conservative state. How do you make your pitch on those kinds of issues where it may be harder to bridge the divide?
Yeah, and I think, too, that's a place where people have to trust your authenticity. And, you know, I'm a former deacon in the Baptist Church. I've taught Sunday school for years. I understand that these are deeply held convictions, and I don't minimize those. I understand, you know, that people feel strongly on these issues. But, you know, Brother Tallarico's not wrong when he says, you know, there's a lot of different views of this. There's a lot of different views on how to read the text. And where I come down on these issues, and particularly on the right to choose, is, you know, we need to trust people to make the best decisions. You know, where is that limited Republican Party, right? Trust women. I trust women in consultation with their families and their pastor, their priest, their doctor, to make really hard choices. Right now, women in Mississippi have to drive to Carbondale, Illinois, to get to the closest reproductive health clinic. Doctors face prosecution, 1 to 10 years in prison, if they don't let a woman spiral downward and get so sick that she's close to dying, and therefore these proceedings are, you know, these procedures are warranted. But I think the other thing we do is we say, look, we don't have to agree on everything to agree on the most important things. It's okay to disagree. I tell Republicans, like, we don't have to be Facebook official. You don't have to proclaim your love for me, right, on Facebook. You don't have to become a Democrat. Like, this isn't normal. This isn't the party of Thad Cochran, right, Elise? This isn't the party of Trent Lott, even. You know, let's get back to the days when we're arguing about things that are really important, and let's understand that maybe we're going to disagree. You can vote for a Democrat, and you can even tell a little white lie and fib about to your friends, you know, at church or in the community what you did, because I think there's a lot of people, and we're seeing this, who, despite all these issues and how they feel, this isn't the Republican Party they knew. My mom and dad are that way. They're McCain Republicans. They've never understood MAGA in the early 80s and assisted living in Oxford. They don't understand how people could vote for this guy. My dad's a Sunday school teacher, doesn't understand how the people in the church are so committed to this guy. And so we're trying to have those serious conversations. We're not diminishing people's convictions. we're saying maybe we don't have to agree on every point.
Let me ask you about the Democratic Party at large here and whether you're getting the help you need, because for such a long time, the Democratic Party has kind of written off a lot of these very ruby red districts in the South and certainly in a place like Mississippi. A, are you getting the help that you need to run a viable campaign? And B, do you want help from the National Democratic Party, or do you look at them and say, look, I know how to talk to my constituents in a way that you don't necessarily, and so we got this? How do you thread that needle?
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's both and. I mean, I do think I know how to talk to these folks, and I don't want to be managed. I think that would be a mistake. And I think the Democratic Party is learning that lesson. We saw that with Spanberger and other elections where they let people run different races. My district's 10,000 square miles. I noticed that one of your New York districts, 13, I think is 10 square miles, 10,000 square miles. I can't get my message out. So I'm having to drive people to cliffjohnsonforcongress.com, asking people around the country to contribute to help us get that message out. We don't have first-time candidate. I thought maybe there'd be some meeting of the candidates where we'd talk about smart things and come up with a strategy, or we'd have some sort of...
Are you out on your own, basically?
So you're getting no support
me and a 25-year-old campaign manager and a bunch of volunteers, a bunch of people who have gotten involved. But it's hard, and it's expensive. And so while we have, people wishing us well in the Democratic Party, we need more help. And, we appreciate the help that the Mississippi Democratic Party has given us, but it's limited in what they can do. So we're in a situation where the voter turnout among black voters in the blackest state in America is going to be huge because of that Calais opinion. We had 7,000 people marching in the streets of Jackson, at least, because they're afraid they're going to be canceled and erased. We have the wind at our backs. When you build a cult of personality, and that personality is not on the ballot, Donald Trump's not on the ballot, we're going to have a lot of people, Republicans, who don't vote. We have real opportunities. Stacey Abrams, who's a Mississippi girl as well.
As we approach the 4-year anniversary of Dobbs, the Supreme Court ruling that ended Roe v. Wade, Republican Senator Susan Collins has been asked to revisit her part that she played in that fateful decision. Collins spoke with reporters last week where she addressed her controversial vote to confirm Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. She said, quote, "I do not regret that vote." But in that same press conference, Collins said she disagreed with Kavanaugh's eventual vote to overturn Roe v. Wade. Morris Katz is back with us. So I'm interested in these comments, but I'm also interested in them and in the greater context of what the liabilities are for the two different candidates. Because in some sense, these kinds of comments from Susan Collins, I think they're kind of already baked in, right? Like, the voters of Maine know about the whole controversy regarding her saying that she thought that Brett Kavanaugh respected president and wouldn't overturn Roe v. Wade. On the other hand, you have Graham Plattner, who your organization is representing, and there still seem to be a lot of, unknowns about him. What assurances can you give that there will not be yet more unflattering stories from his past that come out? He has said there's nothing left to worry about. There's not going to be another shoe to drop. But that's not quite the same thing as it actually happening, because there has been sort of this drip of scandals that have come out from his past.
Look, I think that one critical difference, she had taken the Brett Kavanaugh vote at the time of the last election. Roe had not yet been overturned when she was last on the ballot. And I think there are a lot of Mainers who had voted for Susan Collins many times, who felt like they knew Susan Collins, who felt like they could trust Susan Collins, who have now been lied to by Susan Collins. And I think there is a massive, massive difference in her being on the ballot at a time that Roe is no longer the law of the land because of a vote she took. And I think Mainers are going to hold her accountable for that vote. I also think Mainers feel like they know Graham Plattner, who has had, I think it's now 88 town halls. And Susan Collins, I don't know if Susan Collins has had a town hall since I've been alive. The last time she held the town hall, Graham Plattner was in 8th grade. So Mainers have gotten to interact with Graham on this personal level time after time again, while Susan Collins hides in her nice mansion that her lobbyist husband bought for her. And I think that there is a fundamental issue here of trust. And Mainers now know Graham Plattner, and they trust Graham Plattner. And Susan Collins, I think, with that vote to put Brett Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court, with that vote to end Roe as the law of the land, has broken that trust in a way that cannot be rebuilt.
But has it been negated by all of the allegations against Plattner, which there may be more coming. Can you say that there are not going to be more women coming forward with similar unflattering allegations against Graham Plattner?
What I can say is that Graham Plattner has addressed his past repeatedly, more than I've ever seen any candidate have to talk about their past. And he's been honest.
That might be because he has a lot of problems for it.
No, I think it's because he's talked about, been very honestly and openly about not being the world's greatest boyfriend when he got home from war, about struggling with PTSD, with depression, with drinking too much, with going down dark rabbit holes on the internet. And he's also been honest about what is false, that has been, allegations that have came out against him and false accusations. I think that there's things that, are not seen by the public, which is the level of effort, money, and kind of frenzy around digging up things of Graham's past, which, as someone who works in politics, goes beyond anything I've seen, of people knocking on doors in Maine.
He gives them so much fodder. It just keeps coming and coming and coming. It goes back to vetting. And I want to ask you, at what point is it disqualifying, do you think, some of the things that have happened in this race, in the back?
What I think, though, is when the way we talk about what scandals are or what issues are on kind of national television or in the political establishment is fundamentally disconnected from the lives Mainers are living. Like, how is it not a scandal that Susan Collins is married to a lobbyist who, while she was on the committee deciding what firms get money, gave $76 million to her husband?
Here's the transcript rewritten for clarity while preserving the original meaning. Do you want to know why no one was truly satisfied when this deal was supposedly finalized? Let me explain. There were two distinct groups of unhappy people. First, there were the neoconservatives, the traditional hawkish Republicans who seemed to want conflict at any cost, around the clock, all year long. Naturally, they were furious because they don't want this to end. So they opposed any deal from the start. But even the people who genuinely wanted this conflict to end, regardless of whether the deal itself is good or whether Trump should have gotten involved in the first place and he shouldn't have, even they couldn't bring themselves to celebrate. Because with Donald Trump, things are almost always not what they seem. Remember a few months ago when Trump announced a deal was done, or nearly done. The stock market surged. Then Iranian officials came out and flatly contradicted him, stating that not only was there no deal close to being reached, but both sides weren't even meaningfully talking at that point. The market immediately dropped back down. And to make matters worse, there are widespread reports, alleged but credible according to many sources, that someone within Trump's administration, or at least within his inner circle, made financial trades based on that information, which looks a lot like market manipulation. Beyond that specific incident, there's a broader and deeper problem. Trump can claim a deal exists, but does it really? There are still many significant details left to be resolved, and crucially, no one trusts Donald Trump to follow through. Similarly, no one trusts his close ally, Benjamin Netanyahu. In fact, people may trust Netanyahu even less than they trust Trump, and that is saying something. So the result is this. If you wanted the war to be over, you still can't feel confident that it actually is. And if you never wanted it to end, you're still furious that any partial agreement is even on the table. Trump tried to please everyone, and in doing so, he ended up satisfying no one.